Welcome to Holistic Transformations. By working together, we can change the world. I'm your host, Diane J. Shaver, coach to entrepreneurs and startup businesses that focus on heart as well as the bottom line. On every show, I interview someone who's having a positive impact on our culture and is making a change where it's much needed. Each person I interview is very different, as you probably can tell. But they have in common a commitment and a dedication to making a change that's needed and in only the way that they can. And my wish for you is that they inspire you so that you step up and contribute in whatever way it is. It doesn't have to be huge, it can be anything, but to contribute to making this a better world, a more just, equitable, peaceful world. Okay. So today I have the pleasure of speaking with Cleo Brown, and she's an author, speaker, race relations strategist, and founder of the History Matters Institute. I met Cleo in a networking group where she read a portion of one of her books, Raceology 101, and I was struck by how powerful the writing was, but how gentle she was in her discussion of race relations. And I find her approach to all of it to be very gentle and balanced and so forth. And it really impressed me so much. And this is an issue that is something that's coming up again and again in American politics. And it's been in our history and so forth. So I think it's something that definitely needs to be looked at and discussed. So I want to give you a little background so you know where she comes from, and then you will be clearly impressed about her gentle approach. So at 7, she was in the car when her father was shot, trying to get the right to vote. At 9, she was watching her father pull up Klan crosses at the end of their road. At 10, she was hiding while her older brothers and sisters did target practice in order to defend the house and if the family was attacked at night. And at 11, she was helping adults to learn how to pass the multi-part citizenship test required for them to register to vote. She got to be what she called a little human guinea pig in school integration experiment at age 12. An experience, she said, that proved to be more traumatic than being afraid of being killed. And at 17, she was off to experience the Black Power movement at the predominantly Black Grambling State University. At 21, also affirmative action quotas and some racial healing at General Motors in Anderson, Indiana. So you can see what a powerful, disturbing kind of background that she had to endure. So she shares her story with colleges and universities and schools and churches and organizations to help people understand. She received the HBO Bea Richards Spirit Award for her work in this area. She's the author of Raceology 101, the book that I mentioned previously, and Witness to the Truth, published by the University of South Carolina Press. Raceology 101 is a 2018 first place winner in the Federation of Press Women's Nonfiction category. She's also won first place in speech writers category for the speech she wrote and delivered for the annual Martin Luther King Jr. commemoration in North Charleston, South Carolina. She's also contributed to commentaries to the Charleston Post and Courier and was a contributor to the African American National Biography, Oxford University Press, W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard University, 2008. She's the editor of the monthly History Matters report that brings knowledge and understanding of complex issues of race and class, and monthly updates on the disenfranchisement of people of color. But I want to let Cleo speak for herself. So now I'm going to introduce you to Cleo Brown. I've given you glowing reviews. You have a very impressive background. It's like, wow. Both in wonderful ways and probably really hard ways. So my first question to you, Cleo, other than welcome, is
thank you for having me.
Oh, honey, sure. How do you come to be so balanced when it comes to the issues of inequality? Because, I mean, your background is going to be traumatizing, to say the least. So what did you have to do and say to yourself in order to come to that balanced stance?
Well, actually, I think it was a process all along. And what I mean by that, growing up in the home in which I grew up with my father, who was a Baptist minister, he seemed to approach issues of race in a different way than a lot of people did. And so he always said to us that it was never about the people themselves. So he never said you should hate this person or you should, or he condemned people. He always called it a matter of, well, he did use the word ignorance sometimes, but it was a
I think that's an okay word in this instance.
Matter of not knowing, not understanding, being caught up in a system that caused them to behave the way they did. So he never indicted a whole group. He always explained it as being the result of people not knowing any better. And so when you're taught that it's not just, I just hate you, then even if they hate you, there's a reason why they hate you. So I think it changed the way that we were brought up.
Wow.
I also say that I didn't have a lot of issues until I was in the 8th grade when I went to integrate school. And then when racism became so personal toward me as a child, then I did have to work through those things. So I guess your question was, how did I work through those things? I had to be first conscious of my biases and how I didn't give people the benefit of the doubt. It was like you were guilty and then you had to prove to me that you were innocent. And once I graduated from college and started working for General Motors in an almost all white environment, then and for some reason, Northern whites were different from Southern whites. And so it was trying to adjust to having friendships with white people, which I had never had in the South. And so it was a process. It was about a 10-year process, but it was a deliberate act on my part to start thinking consciously about what I was thinking.
But it would have had to be conscious. And I think what you said was so powerful just now. I'm sure everything you say will be powerful, but that it is unconscious. I mean, you can't hate somebody you don't know. So it's part of a system, and it's part of a blindness, and
or maybe you can't hate people that you get to know.
That you get to know. Well, no, but I think what I'm trying to say is this, and you can correct me, please feel free, any point, that what's happening now, and that I am seeing from my point of view, which is going to be very different from yours, because mine is very superficial, because it just is. But the system is set up on both sides so that we view one another in a particular way. But it may or may not be accurate, and that's kind of what you were saying. And what I meant about hatred, I mean, in order to hate somebody, you have to have a reason, and it has to be very specific. But what I'm seeing in like Charlottesville and things like that there was no specific person that was hated. It was just looking at a class in a particular way. And so that is really uninformed, ignorant, and whatever. And it's that blindness that I think has been there. So tell me what you think about what I've just said.
I think it's all about fear. The march in Charlottesville is about fear, white male fear. And so when the problem is, and I think I covered it quite well in one of my books on the chapter called Bamboozled Again. And powerful people create a lot of class friction. And they make poor people in one group fight against poor people in another group, even though they both have the same problem. And so in America for the last 20 years or so, they've been marking poverty with a black face, although the majority of poor people in America are white. And so whenever poverty is marked as a Black person or a Hispanic issue, then the programs that come forth aren't very useful. When there was a war on poverty with President Johnson, all those programs that came out were very, very helpful in getting people out of poverty, because poverty was marked as the problem of your friends and your neighbors. So whenever poverty is, according to how poverty is marked, is how it's addressed. So right now, poverty was marked with a black face, so no programs came out that really helped people. So now you have all these people in Appalachia, just really poor rural neighborhoods that aren't getting any help because the programs have been marked as helping these people you don't want to help. And so the country is now in a situation where the really poor people of America are not getting the programs that actually get them out of poverty.
Right. And that's obviously becoming an issue in this upcoming election too. So it's going to be an interesting kind of thing. So talk to me about your History Matters Institute, because obviously that's a really pivotal piece here. So tell me about that.
Well, I created History Matters Institute after my first book came out, which was Witness to the Truth. And because that story of my life, my father's life in my hometown, got me in front of audiences talking about issues of race, I discovered that, wow, people really don't know much history. And history explains what's happening today. And so that's when I created History Matters Institute, is because I've discovered that history explains almost everything.
So be specific. I mean, like the textbooks are not talking about, well, when I first came, I'm a Yankee, I'm from the North. And when I came here, I was struck that nobody talked about slavery, and there was never any apology or restitution or acknowledgement. And that really floored me. And so has it been wiped clean? Is that what's going on with that in terms of history?
The history books, particularly the ones in South Carolina, the publishing company and the writers of the history book had a specific agenda, which was to paint this picture of the South in its glory and how it had been put up on by the North to tell them what to do. And when history is written for a specific purpose, which is not to tell the truth, but to make something look good and to make something else disappear, then that's the way it is. There's an old saying that says that as long as the hunter gets to write the story of the hunt will never glorify the lion. And so that was by design. And so that's why History Matters is so important. I feel that there can be no real meaningful discussions about race, unless there is some clearer understanding of race, historically.
So tell us the things that we're missing in our history book. What are the things that are not there that should be there?
There is
we only have an hour, so I'm just saying.
There is no real indication of how horrific slavery actually was.
Yeah.
Even calling them slaves instead of enslaved Africans takes away from the humanity of the people. There is no real history about how things were applied differently. People really don't understand Jim Crow laws and how that ushered in 100 years almost of discrimination, legal discrimination. Mm-hmm. People don't understand how when loans were made available, 30-year loans were first available. They'll read that in the history books, but they won't read that about redlining and how Black communities couldn't get any of those loans. They'll read about Social Security being enacted, but they won't read that it wasn't allowed to be offered to farm workers or domestic, which was the majority of the jobs for Black people in the South. They can read about the veterans' benefits, and that they could go to college, but you would never read that Black people, it was illegal for Black people to go to quote unquote white colleges. So basically, how are you going to get any benefit from that veterans benefit? And there is no discussion of the economic implications of a whole generation being able to buy houses on one side and another generation that lived at the same time being unable to. So I think that they present this program was passed, but there is no understanding of how all these beneficial programs did not benefit this one group of people. So I think those kinds of things are important to add, but I think it's really, really important for people to talk about slavery and not call Reconstruction this time, which I heard just the other day at a Toastmasters meeting, that it was this time when all these horrible things were done to Southerners, but there is no concern about millions of people being released into freedom with nothing to start with. No house, no farm equipment, and so I just think that glorifying people who were truly evil, and I'm going to use the actual word evil.
This is your interview. You can use whatever you want.
That were truly evil, and glorifying them and putting them on statutes all over the United States, people who did really horrible things. They did some good things for some people, but they did some really, really horrible things to other people. And to never put a balanced story in the history books. I think that's very, very, it makes it hard to have discussions. In fact, there's this story I like to tell, if I may.
Please.
It's an analogy, and I think it would help your listeners better understand what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
Okay, so just pretend that there are two people invited to give a proposal to do some work at a house. And both people are told that this bedroom needs to be remodeled and beautified. Okay, so that's both of them are told that, but the second person is also told that there might be some mold and termites in the wall. So both of them come in with their proposal, and the person number one, who was only told they need to beautify the room, their proposals say paint the walls, sand the floors, get new bedspreads and draperies. And then when the other guy presents his proposal, he's giving him like And why are you ripping out walls? And then the person with number 2 is looking at person number 1 saying, and why are you just putting paint over a rotten wall without checking to see what's behind the wall? And so America is in this place,
right,
where there are 2 different stories. And somebody has been told this part of the story, and another person has been told just the surface stuff.
yeah,
And so the people who actually been behind the wall and saw what was behind the wall, they're offering this solution. And person number 1 is offering this real surface solution.
sure.
And so that's what happens when blacks and whites get in the room together to have these discussions.
Right. What do you think is the underlying purpose for continuing this?
To continue the legacy of who controls power in America. That's foundational. It's not about race. It's really not about race, because people choose. The Black experience goes up and down in America. So when it's useful to have a lot of Black people in the labor force, like when there's a war, and then the rules are relaxed. And then when the war is over, then the rules are changed. So it's all about power, white male power.
Right.
And
I think it is. I think it is white male particularly. I mean, and I feel, as I've watched some of what's going on, I feel like the women who are involved in that as the consorts or wives of these men kind of take glory from them. It's kind of reflected glory, so it's not even their stuff. It's like, yeah. So it's.
I agree with that.
Yeah, yeah. So where do we start? I mean, how do we do this? And how long does it take? I was thinking about this the other day, and it's a whole system. The system is very firmly entrenched by people who want to keep it there. And one of the gifts, I think, of our present government is that we can see what has been hidden for so long. It's right out there. And I think that's the beginning of being able to change something, because you can't change what you can't see. So to me, that's the beginning of it. So where do we go from here? And is it something that's going to take years? Is it going to take centuries? What is it going to take? What do you think?
Well, it took centuries to get here, so we've been doing this. I
don't feel like we have centuries. We don't have centuries to clean this up.
We don't have centuries to clear it up, but it can start in a community. It can start in a city. And I think that Charleston has started. And I think that at some point we might actually be the one that can help other cities to have these conversations. We've been doing the Race Equity Institute classes, and about 400 people in Charleston have gone through those classes so far. And what that class does is help people see how institutions create and sustain a system. And so as gatekeepers, and that what we mean by gatekeepers, the people who control those systems, as they start to see and be taught and understand things from a different perspective, then when they sit at the board meeting or they sit at staff meetings, then there can be different types of conversations coming forth now. Because, you know, as my dad always says, you learn better, you do better. And I think it's all about learning. So as you see in Charleston, it's coming from multiple areas. There is, of course, the race equity classes that's basically teaching history. Then there's courageous conversations. What is the purpose of that? To have people African Americans actually get to sit in front of an audience and tell their stories. Because, you know, we have PhDs in white history and just in having to know how people operate just to survive. And as a child, just to stay alive, I had to understand how white people thought and felt and operated. And so we spent a lot of time trying to understand white people, where Black people were kind of invisible. Yeah. And so when we get to start telling our stories, when we start writing our own stories, when people start reading our stories, and then conversations can go on from there. There's even a book club that's called, what is it, Readings Against Racism, and they meet in Mount Pleasant Library, at the library, and they all read a certain book, and then they get together and discuss it.
Cool.
So there are things happening that never happened before the murders in Charleston. And for us, 3 years, I think it's 3 years later, for us to still be trying to delve deep, go deeper and deeper and deeper. I'm pleased to be here in Charleston and to be a part of these conversations that are occurring, and new people are being drawn in.
Cool. Someone said that because Charleston was such a huge port, that it has to happen here first. Mm-hmm. And once it happens here, as what you said, it can spread to others, but in terms of spiritual healing, mm-hmm. that it need to happen here first.
Yes, it needs to happen here, and something has to change within the religious community, because you have to understand the history, that it was the church that was complicit. Yeah. Not just complicit. The church helped to set the rules for we're engaged in setting regular doctrines and things relating to slave and the selling of human beings. It was the Southern Baptists who constantly taught that the cursed ham had been cursed in Genesis, and that what was being done to Black people had been ordered by God. And so we have a lot of things going on. And then when you look at 40%, about 40% of all Africans who were enslaved in America came through the Charleston port. Yeah. And so this is the place. This is the place of the great sin, the great, how can I describe it? This, on this soil, is where children were ripped from their parents, and people were sent with other Africans from other tribes that spoke other languages, never to see home again. And what's so interesting is that I went to an event on Saturday, yeah, and there was a man there from the Congo. And he said that I tear up and I'm emotional when I tell this story. He said, my ancestors fought against the slavers. That's what they call the people who came to steal Africans and take them to the ships. And he said that my family fought against the slavers. And so they picked my family to punish. And they came and killed all of the people in a major part of his family. Wow. And he said, but one was taken to prove a lesson, that I guess the king was taken to the ship and taken away. And he said, and we never knew whatever happened to him. And he said, every time I walk around in America, I'm looking around. Is that person related to me? Is that person related to me? Yeah. And then he began to tear up, and I'm like, here is a story that has been passed down through his family, yeah, for over 100 years, and he still feels pain of the people, the person that he lost, that he knows by name, that was brought over here. So it's like people don't really connect what happens now with what happened back then. Like they wouldn't even see me being as the age that I am, that the person who raised my father they were born in the 1840s. My dad was raised by his grandparents, who were both born in the 1840s. And so what my dad learned about how to be a father, he learned from someone who had been enslaved.
Yeah.
So it's a lot closer in connection than what people want to think.
Right. Is it that they don't want to think, or they just don't know? I mean, for me, like, I keep learning and learning and learning. And every time I learn something, then I have a conversation with somebody and something else comes up. So it's just a question of learning. So how much of this, I wonder, is deliberate and how much is just not knowing, literally not knowing?
A lot of it has to do with not knowing, but the problem is that most people won't pursue. See, most people won't be like you and actually actively pursue learning. People will learn what is put in front of them. But we have an even bigger issue with this generation because Google Analytics will serve up more of what you already believe. So if you click on certain kinds of websites, it's going to say, oh, that's what they like. And so they're going to give you more. So you don't have a balanced, you can't, like when you used to scan down through the newspaper, you used to pick up stories, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Now the stories come up by topic. You can just skip certain things. So nowadays, I think we're even more narrow-minded.
So part of it has to be in schools. Is that happening at all?
Oh, no, not around the Charleston area. In fact, they are hardly doing Black history in a lot of schools. Black History Month, the 1 month when you could get some Black history.
Wow.
So
even television does that. The YWCA, I don't know if you know Lavonda, who is absolutely wonderful, and they do the whole Martin Luther King, a huge event. And so it's there for people who want it. It's just not available in schools. It's like, that's ridiculous in a way.
Yes, but it's not going to change in the schools until the hearts and minds of the school board and the school administrators change, because they are the ones who make the rules and pick, what is, well, they don't totally pick the curriculum because a lot of that happens at the state level, but it still is the hearts and minds of people who are administrators for education.
But you've gotten to go into some schools and do your project, your workshop, your 90-minute workshop. How does that work, and what kind of schools can you get into?
Well, I've done more with preschool teachers, like daycares, early childhood, because studies show that by 6 or 7, children have already set up these biases about race at that young age. And so I found that preschool teachers are very receptive, very, very willing to listen, and they're thoughtful about biases that they might have towards certain children. I've discovered, or in my experience, teachers, particularly high school teachers, are probably the hardest group.
Wow.
To convince that something is
amiss,
problematic.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if it's because as a teacher, you already feel like I've committed my life to helping children. And so maybe it's a paradigm issue to actually have someone coming in and saying that you might be doing something that is actually harmful to certain children within your class. So, and when you're talking about a fish issue versus a pond issue, and so you're saying, well, it must be the parents, it must be the child, and they implement all these programs to help the child and the parent to be a better parent, blah, 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 blah. But yet the fish still die. And not just a few fish, but all the well-nourished fish, the fish coming from the great homes, the great parents. But if they are blackfish, they are still dying in this pond that's being controlled by 80% white teachers nationally. 80% of all public school teachers are white, and most of them are white women. And to have any conversation that say that there might be something wrong with the pond and not just a fish issue, it just does not go over very well.
Did you ever see the movie Freedom Writers?
No, only part of it. I didn't see the whole movie.
It's very powerful and it's real. I mean, that was
I know it's a true
person. But the things that she did in her classroom, which was predominantly Black and Hispanic, but it also had Asians. I mean, it had everybody that you could think of in it. And what she did was so profound and allowed people to see one another as human beings and that they share the same experience. I mean, no matter what circumstances people grow up in, the very wealthy and the very poor, they're all going to experience the same kind of things because life does not discriminate between the rich and whatever. And if you want an example, like the Kennedys had more tragedies in their family than most people. But it's like we all are the same. We all go through the same things, the same growth things, the same hurts, the same whatever. So I think once people understand that we're just all human and it doesn't matter about color or circumstance or anything, we are here to learn, to grow, to whatever, and we're going to experience certain things, and no one's excluded from that. So,
I think that there is an issue because there are regular things of life that everybody experiences. But there are things that I experience as a Black person that Asians somewhat minorly experience. Hispanics probably experience it quite a bit. But there are some things that I experience as a Black person that is not in common.
No, I agree.
And so when we are made to feel that our stories can't be told because it causes somebody else discomfort. And what I mean by that is when I go out and share my story, there will be different types of reactions from the audience, right? So some people will come up afterwards and say, and I'm talking about white audiences.
Okay.
Within that audience, there will be different types of reactions. There will be people who will say, yes, I know about that. My parents helped to keep the schools segregated, or they will share different experiences when the schools were integrated. We understand that. My generation generally says we understand what you're talking about, or we accept what you're saying. Then you might have like people in that 40-year, they will debate you. they will say, actually make it seem like what you're saying isn't even true. They will minimize. They will say that that wasn't the reason that it happened. You're looking at it the wrong way.
Oh my God.
And then 30-year-olds and down will say, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And I'm like, it seems to be a generational thing. And I guess it's what you're seeing as you come up, in your formative years. And so children who are coming up now, I think they will listen because they see it. Yeah, there is a difference. There is a difference.
I wasn't, it got out of context. What I was saying is that and I hear what you're saying. I'm not saying what it seemed like. I apologize. What I'm saying is that people have to understand that we are all human.
Oh, definitely.
And that's all I'm saying. And that we all come here to experience things and to do things. And no one is above anyone else. We're all the same. That's what I was trying to say. And that's what the common human thing is. That's what I was trying to say. I disagree about background, and I don't know about the kids you're talking about. I grew up in a household where the only Black person I ever saw was someone who came to clean our house. And my family, my mother was nice, like she would make lunch for the lady and all that stuff, but it was, they were the maid. And so as I was growing up, I started to see something different. So I think that we have the ability to see no matter what our background is, but there has to be heart and there has to be a willingness. And that's what I'm saying about understanding that we're all human, because once you get that, then it opens you up to seeing people differently. So that was my point. That's what I was just trying to say.
Okay.
But because I hear what you're saying very clearly, and I don't disagree with any of it at all, and I couldn't because it's not my experience. But no, I think we have to get down to common humanity. We have to understand that we're all human. We all feel. What is the thing that Shylock says? Do I not? If you cut me, do I not bleed? Remember that from?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and I think that is why it's so important for people to talk and to read. Talk more, read more. Because if you really think about me being in a corporate environment, right? I'm going to work every day with co-workers. We're traveling together, conducting business together, but they really don't know anything about what I had gone through. So if I had told them, well, for 4 years of my life, I went to bed every night thinking I'd be killed by in the morning or that I'd be burned alive in my house, they would just probably have turned around and like, what are you talking about? Yeah, and what I'm saying is that Jim Crow created this horrible, horrible system of inequities.
Yeah.
Then there were these laws that passed that say, no, you can't do that anymore. But you can come and work in corporate America, but you mustn't talk about what happened to you, what was done to you. Just move on. But people are still operating with I'd say people are still operating with what Jim Crow taught them. So if you're a policy maker and you have control over policies, but you grew up till, say, you were 30, still under Jim Crow, where there was a legal system that made it appear that Black people were not as smart, not as clean, they were like bad people, all these things that Jim Crow taught children in the South. You see them reflected in their decision making. So I give you an example, like Jefferson Beauregard Sessions. and the kinds of things he did in the 90s. And it was a direct reflection of having grown up. All his formative years being under Jim Crow. People like McConnell in Kentucky, he would have grown up. All of his formative years would have been under Jim Crow. And so when we don't, as older leaders, any leaders over 60 and up, 65 especially and up, if there was never any conscious reckoning of what Jim Crow taught, because Jim Crow taught that white men get first choice at everything without competition. That is what Jim Crow legal system did, created a set of rules and regulations that say that you get first seat on the bus, you get all the jobs, unless they are bad jobs, then you can give them to somebody else. Women aren't allowed, you know. And so all these rules had to be changed after, or with the demise or the tearing down of what Jim Crow built. And so you have all these leaders who grew up in that system. And I wrote a piece called The Last Jim Crow Generation. I wrote it when I was in my 20s. What will become of America when the children of the worst generation come into power? When I was in college at Grambling, I wrote that piece. Because I was concerned way back then, how could children be okay if they never deal with what their childhood taught them?
I mean, people don't understand that they're being taught the mores. Right. I mean, we understand when we open a book and we read math or literature or something, but we don't understand that we are being taught mores and how to behave and that kind of stuff. That is so subliminal in some ways.
Yes.
People don't understand it. And I remember the John Birch Society, I think, was out of Vermont. I had a woman come and we had a very short acquaintanceship. I was in my 30s, I think, and she came over for lunch and she explained to me how deficient one race was compared to another race. And I said to her, very interesting, and we'll see you later. So that was Yankees. I mean, that's
the reason I'm actually smiling is because I picked up a flyer. Like, I have all my daddy's old papers and everything. Yeah. And so just Saturday, I picked up a flyer that my dad had from the John Birch Society.
Oh,
where they were coming to my hometown to speak in the 60s to talk about the tyranny of integration.
Oh, God.
And how this tyrannical government is telling us what to do. And they are going to make us go to school with Black children.
Yeah.
But it was the John Birch Society. Just looked at that on Saturday. But, you know, I think that's the importance of both of the books that I've done, is because Witness to the Truth is like the fun story that takes you from slavery and brings you all the way to about 1970 something. And it steps you through history and explains how one thing is built on top of another. Then Raceology, my second book, is just to hit on some of the points that people seem to get hung up on this or hung up on that, and to kind of get people thinking, because we're living in a world where modern day people on TV and writers write for hits. They write for people to respond, and how many comments can I get, and how many people shared my post. I write for introspection. I speak for introspection. When I say something, I want you to sit back and kind of contemplate. And that's especially with my writing. I really, really try to write for thoughtfulness. not to get anybody angry, not to get anybody upset, but I want you to think, let me consider another point of view, or I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
And I try to explain how one thing is connected to another thing. And as you understand history, you understand people's behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think with, again, the good that's come out of the current administration, it's helping us see how blind we have been and how conditioned we are. And that's a whole other thing. I mean, just seeing yourself, or for me, myself, as a conditioned person, and I'm a deeply thinking person. I've always been that way. But it just, there's so many things to unravel and, you know, to learn, and it's endless. It just keeps on
endless.
going.
It's endless.
And that's the point of being here. And in my world, that's the point of being on this planet, is to become more and more and more and more, and to learn more and more and more, and to do better and better and better. I mean,
yeah.
Why we're here.
Yeah. My dad says, when you stop learning, you're dead.
Yeah.
Not physically dead, but you're dead.
Well, we got a lot of that going around, unfortunately. But anyway, so again, I want to go back into the workshop thing. I love that, addressing race and class consciously. Think about what you just thought. So how do you do that 90-minute program? And how does it start out? Where do you do it primarily in universities? And you said it's primarily white audiences, but I just want to know how it runs.
Oh, no, I didn't say. I say that I speak before a lot of.
Okay.
Oh, not the workshops. No, the workshops are generally people who work at a place, so that would be all types of
everything. Yeah,
ethnicities would be at a workplace.
Sure.
But it actually started with what used to be ScanPo, but it's now Together SC, with all the nonprofits coming together for training at their annual conference. And it was right after the murders at Emmanuel, and I did a workshop for nonprofit leaders.
Yeah.
And it kind of grew out of that. But I do it just using photos and you know, where you just instantly react to what you saw.
Yeah.
And then when people discuss what they saw or why they interpreted something a certain way, it really brings out, by accident, a lot of the way that people think and why they thought that way.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where you're exposed to certain things, and you're given an opportunity to react quickly.
Oh, okay.
Now, you don't give it a lot of thought, because it's what's just in your automatic response system.
Yeah. Which is most authentic. That would be the most authentic.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And then based on those reactions, it's hard to explain unless you go through it. But
no, but this is giving me some parameters for it.
Yes. And when people get in that circle, and then there are certain questions that are asked about the way that they responded, and then actually using statistics. I've compiled statistics from some of the other classes and how they responded, and and why they said they felt that way. And then we talk about, well, what problems can this cause? If that's what you saw first, if that's what you thought, but it's also helping people to understand, I really do make judgments quickly.
We all do.
Because if you just come up and say, you judge this based on that, they say, no, I didn't. But when they actually see it in front of, oh, okay, you do that. So it's just a kind of eye-opening kind of exercise, and people learning that everything is automatic.
Yeah.
Everybody operates on an automatic response system.
Yep.
But what is that causing if you're doing this particular job?
Right.
How does that impact?
So I think we respond automatically, but then I think we take a moment and just question, okay, is this accurate, whatever. I mean, I think it's almost like a physical response to things. And then the question becomes, okay, is this something I need to look at? And sometimes that comes down the road. It doesn't come right away, but that piece is there too, I think. So this is mostly corporate?
No, mostly educators.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's great. And remind me a little bit, and you can tell me, of Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes. Remember that a long, long time ago?
The
woman that went around and did
oh yes. Oh, definitely, yes.
And it skewed things for people because they had assumed that everything was blue eyes, which would be white people, and then the brown-eyed people, which would be African American or Latino or whatever, and then they got it. And it's kind of true. And the funny part is we all came out of Africa, which is pretty hysterical when you think about it. Pardon me?
I say yes, according to DNA.
Yeah. So, I mean, it goes back to that thing where I said that we all have to understand that we're just human, and that's it. And that cuts across everything, and that's the piece that is missing. It was like when the government shut down and somebody said to them, well, why don't you get a loan from the government so you could buy food for your children? So it's just
a lot of class issues too.
It is. It's just lack of, I mean, I thought about this morning as I was thinking about talking to you today. There was a woman that I knew. I had boutiques in Newport, and she worked for me, actually. And she came from a very wealthy family. And there was somebody that we knew that was having some kind of issue, and they needed to come up with $2,000. And this woman said to me, well, anybody can come up with $2,000. Oh my God. But it was genuine. I mean, in her world. So that's it. We get in our world, and it gets insular, and we don't see beyond that world. And that's a lot of it, and it's like that man saying to the people, why can't you take a government loan to buy food for your children? It's like, and it's not mean-spirited. It's just ignorant.
Yeah. And I think that's the issue, is because people who have means are regularly dictating policies to solve problems for people without means.
Yeah, with no understanding.
Yeah. And if they allow people without means to explain or share their stories, which is in the same case of what I'm saying here, is if African Americans were allowed to share their stories, then there would be a different understanding, which would result in different policies, which would result in different results, different outcomes.
Sure. Yeah. Is that something that you say to people who are making policy? Because that would be powerful.
I'll use it next time.
No,
I mean, they talk about that, especially in nonprofit circles. There's an actual book called Toxic Charities, and it talks about how people, grant makers and wealthy funders, philanthropists, how they only want to fund things that aren't necessarily the things that people actually need.
There was a story, a man from one of the Scandinavian countries was being interviewed on NPR, and he went to something called Davos, I think is the name of it, and it's a group of people who are very, very wealthy, the ultra wealthy, and they come together to discuss things that are going on in the world, like climate change and all of that. And he was saying to them, well, you all have your planes here about climate change. You all came in on your private plane. And then they were describing things that they wanted to do to help people, but none of it would really help people. It would be like giving money to a certain organization, but not really helping, like what you were talking about, you know, not addressing the real issue. And he said he didn't think he'd be invited back again, but that's what he was talking about. And that we need to bring in people. That to me would be, if you could go and say that to the right people, that would be very powerful. And so if I can encourage you to do that, that would be wonderful.
Okay, I'll mark that down.
Yeah, because, you know, that's the stuff. I mean, we need to say these things. We need people to understand. And I have seen people, and I'm sure you have too, who are, I know are good-hearted, and a lot of them are Christians, so I will put that in there, and say the most ignorant things, and they're just unconscious. It's just an unconscious thing. They will describe, someone was going to a party and was saying, well, the music was so loud, and you know how those people are, and you know what they're talking about. So, and it's somebody who has friends who are African American, but when push comes to shove, it's like that stuff is like buried there, but it's there, but it's there. And it's that kind of stuff. It's just raising awareness, I guess.
Yeah, it's really actually having people to get interested in learning more, because if you don't see a problem or an issue as impacting you and your family, you might not even pay any attention to it whatsoever.
Yeah.
And
it's just a human issue.
But the problem is that you're making, not you specifically, but I'm saying people at high levels are making decisions that seriously impact the lives of poor people, and they're actually causing problems.
Yeah.
Making problems greater because they really don't understand, and they think that it doesn't have anything to do with them, but it does.
Of course it does. It's that thing, we're all human again. Okay, so we've talked about all the stuff that's going on that is problematic and all that stuff. Now we've got just a few minutes. What are we going to do about this? What can we do now? What can everyone do to make a difference, to do something to start this process? So that, I mean, I always believe that you can change anything, and it takes desire and it takes commitment, but anybody can change anything. So what can we do?
Well, number one, as the owner of History Matters Institute, we need to start reading our history, true history, not the history taught in incomplete, I won't say untrue, incomplete history taught in our history books. We need to start checking books out of the library that help people learn about the Black experience. And
give me some names of books. Give me some names of books.
Oh God, I'm drawing other
right?
The one I should have written it down.
That's okay. We can
Other Sons. What is it? It's the one that is probably one of the best. Oh my! Why am I drawing a blank?
We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it, or we'll just put it on the website. It's fine.
Okay, I'll give you some names later.
Okay.
But start reading more. Start talking to people. Try to make a friend with a person of a different ethnic group than yourself. And I didn't say an acquaintance, I said actually make a friend.
Yeah, it's different.
And someone that you will end up talking to and actually going a little deeper. For people who have learned more, be willing to say something to your friends when they are either telling off-color jokes, saying very derogatory things about a whole group of people. You may say something derogatory about an individual, but when you start lumping whole groups, you need to speak up and say something. That would help a lot, just bringing people's attention to what they just said.
Right.
And begin to start participating in things in your community that are learning opportunities and that give you an opportunity to either just sit and listen or to go and talk. And if you search around on Facebook or internet or different places, especially your libraries, they can probably provide you some information on different groups that are working and have interest in learning more about history as it relates to race and systemic racism. And what I mean by that, race that operates to the detriment of certain groups just because of the way the system is designed.
Right.
Because I think it all starts from learning the history. And once you learn the history, you will no longer be able to look at things the same way.
Love that. And what about how we can change? And I mean, I'm really stuck on this. I think this is so cool. What you said about getting people who are disenfranchised in the process that changes the disenfranchisement.
Yes.
How can we do that? What's the best way to do that in your eyes?
Whenever you're working on a problem, even if you're a corporate manager, and I know this from experience in the corporate world, you don't bring people into the room who are actually doing the work. And so you are sitting there as a manager, like, let me solve this problem. We need to do this. We need to do that. Well, what you did caused the problem somewhere else. We need to actually you don't have to bring everybody, but you could find people who are on fire for change in their community and ask them questions. If we do this, what do you think this will cause? Do you think this will solve the problem? What types of things do you see are problems in your community? If you had the opportunity to be the ruler of all things, you do. And so you engage them, but you have to make them feel comfortable, because people who are disenfranchised or without have to be made comfortable. It's just like conversations on race. White people have to make the Black person feel comfortable to tell the truth about their experiences, because we have a history of, you don't want to hear it. If we even start to talk about it, we're shut down in our conversation, or people argue with us. And so you'll hear people saying over and over again, I wouldn't even go down that road. I wouldn't even go down that road to even try to explain it to them. It has to be this comfort space. It has to be a comfort space, so that when people are invited in, they are made to feel welcome. And you must understand, before you can actually do it, you must understand that what this person brings to the table is important, even though they're quote unquote way down the ladder, beneath you, below you. But you have to understand that there is no limitation on wisdom based on economic level. You can find some of the wisest people in the world in impoverished neighborhoods. You have to be really smart to survive on nothing. And within systems that work against you, you have to be very creative. I know about that. I grew up in a 4-room house with no running water. So you invite them to the table, you make them feel welcome, you listen carefully, and you ask questions that show that you're trying to understand and not just try to make them see your point of view, that you're actually listening to their point of view for understanding.
So it comes down to that whole thing, we're just human beings, that's it. Nobody's above anybody else in real terms, but economically that's what's changed it, I guess. But
and educationally,
yes, which has to do with economics, I think, too, as well. But
that's true. That's correct.
This has been absolutely wonderful. I appreciate your being candid with me and being open and sharing your experiences and stuff. People need to hear this, and I think all I remember is at the church after the AME massacre. What is it? Something Brown Church.
Oh, that's Emmanuel. Is the church where the killings happened?
No, but the church.
The service.
Something Brown.
Morris Brown.
Morris Brown. I was at
AME church. Yes.
Right. I was at that service, and the ministers looked out and they said, "We've never seen a congregation like this." It was mostly white, so there was that statement of this is not okay, and we do stand, and so that to me was the beginning of something.
Oh, yes, it definitely was the beginning of something, because what is happening here in Charleston, I don't think is happening other places. And I always say that by Black people, by the person coming into court and saying, I forgive Dylan Roof. A lot of Black people across the country were very upset about that. Like, why would you let something happen to you and you just let them off like that? But what it did, and I think people don't understand this, what it did was it caused America to have no place to look but at the problem itself. The problem of racism. If it had been riots, if it had been protests and marches, then all the TV cameras would have swung around to cover that.
Right.
Because there was quiet. There was nothing to look at but what the problem was. Yeah. This arose out of a racial act where he learned from a website that the person who wrote for that website lives in Somerville area.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Oh my God.
And that is the website of an organization that came out of the White Citizens Council. The White Citizens Council was the organization that terrorized my daddy and his generation. And the remnants of that organization formed this new organization, and that was the website that Dylan Roof went to. And that just shows that everything is connected. One generation, bringing down this same bad teachings to the next generation.
However, we have people like you and other people who are going out and making change, who are doing things. And I believe that even though things looked really dark and sometimes in this last year, that things are changing, things are moving, people are doing things, there is consciousness. And the people that I interview are conscious people, and they are contributing like you, and they are making a difference. And that's what I really want to focus on. And as horrible as things are and have been, we have within us that spirit that strength, that wisdom to make things better. And
that's correct.
And that's really what you're about. I mean, that's
Yes,
the bottom
that's
line. So I
the
want
bottom
to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I say that is the bottom line, to make things better.
Yeah. And we can, and we can. Nothing is hopeless, and we can. So I want to leave our listeners with that, and to feel hopeful, and to see that someone like you, Cleo Brown, is out there making a difference. So thank you so very much. If you want to hang around after, I want to chat with you 1 second before we part company. But thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And again, the author of Raceology 101 and Witness to the Truth, race relations strategist, and founder of the History Matters Institute. And now we know why it matters. So I appreciate your work. It's very important, and it's wonderful. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you all for joining us on Holistic Transformations. By working together, we can change the world. And I hope you are inspired today to contribute what you have to make a difference in this world, so that we have a world that is peaceful and equitable and respectful and supports everyone, because we're all human here together. So this is your host, Diane J. Shaver, saying thank you for joining us. I'm coach to entrepreneurs and startups that focus on heart as well as the bottom line. So please join us next time when I interview another guest who is helping to change our world for the better. And we'll see you then.